these things is not like the others. One of these things doesn't belong. Can you tell which thing is not like the other by the time I finish this song?
Hey! Thought we talked about this. Quit taking my stuff. This is mine. My lucky hat.
It's the weekend, and you're on your way to your favorite donut place to buy maple frosted cream, not custard, cream-filled Long Johns, okay? You get there, somebody cuts in front of you and buys the last of the maple frosted cream-filled donuts. What are you thinking? I'm gonna kill that guy. You're thinking, that's not fair. Maybe you're on your way to your vacation spot, a family reunion. Shoot, it might even be work, right? And you're in the passing lane of traffic going along with the flow of traffic. Have you ever done this? And the highway patrol decides to pick you to give a speeding ticket to. What are you thinking? That's not fair. You're sitting around with your family on vacation, or maybe it's a family reunion, and one of the family members decides to buy inflatables for everyone to enjoy water time. And so you look around the circle and you see some people are getting swans and rubber duckies, but you get stuck with this inflatable. True story. You're thinking to yourself, that's not fair. I mean, when was the last time you said to yourself, that's not fair? I mean, for those of you that have kids, I get it all the time. My 9-year-old points out that it's not fair that I get to play Fortnite whenever I want, and he only gets to play an hour a day, as if that's all I do. You know, it's like, it's not fair you get to eat whatever you want. I'm like, when you grow up, son, that's what my dad told me anyway. You know, we say that's not fair all the time. And you know what? In simple cases like that, we can kind of work our way through it. But the truth is, it can get real personal real fast. Like when somebody in your company who's less qualified, been there less than you, maybe even is less everything than you, but they get the job that you want, the promotion you deserve, that's not fair. Or sometimes this happens in our neighborhood where you have that one neighbor, or sometimes at work, that one coworker, or sometimes with our family, that one family member who has a tendency to say things that aren't true about you to everybody else without having a conversation, dragging your name through the mud. You're thinking, that's not fair. For those of you that are married, you could have a spouse that's critical, uncaring, too busy, disconnected, and when you look around and you hear other people's stories, you're thinking to yourself, well, that's not fair. I mean, today, I want to talk about how we respond to people who treat us unfairly. I want to look at actually the Bible, a letter that was written 2,000 years ago, and I think what you're going to see is how strikingly relevant it is for our culture today. And the bottom line, if you're taking notes, is this. If you want to write this down, you can. When I know where I belong, I am free to honor everyone. I know for some of you, you're already taking a deep breath, like, okay, this would have been a good week to skip church. No, it's like, this can be challenging, can't it? Even when they don't treat me fairly, when you know where you belong, you can honor everyone. So I want to talk about that, and I know that some of what we're going to talk about may be a little challenging for some. And so let's take a collective deep breath. I am so thrilled that you are here today. In fact, I believe that it is part of God's plan that you're tuning in right now or seated in the auditorium that you're a part of. And I believe if more and more people in our world would understand this principle, even if they don't believe everything that I believe about the Bible, if we could understand this principle, it could be a world changer. And so while I pray, will you invite God to help you set aside distractions to receive from him what he has for you today? Let's do that together. God, thank you so much for every person here. For me, it is humbling to stand before people and try to share something that I feel like you're still teaching me how to live out in my life. And so collectively, God, myself included, help us set aside all distractions, all of our ego, all of what we think we already know. And God, we open-heartedly want to receive from you whatever it is that we might need, even the slightest adjustment in our mindset or our behavior. And so nothing in my life stand in the way of what you have for each of us today. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, welcome to Cedar Creek. Those of you that are joining us at our different campuses here at Perrysburg, online. I know some of you are tuning in later on in the week, and if you're here for the first time, it's a pleasure to have you with us today. My name is Ben. Every summer, we try to take a little part of the Bible and we give some intentional focus to that. My hope is that it makes the Bible a little more relevant and understandable for you. It can be so intimidating and challenging to read. Other people read it and they're like, oh, it's amazing. And then you try to read it and it's like, I don't really even understand where to begin. And so we've been spending the last few weeks in what was originally a letter written by one of Jesus' disciples. His name is Peter. He followed Jesus, one of Jesus' closest disciples. And Peter was writing a letter to a group of Christian churches in what we would call Turkey today. But at the time, it was a part of the Roman Empire, and they felt out of place. They felt mistreated, abused. We talked about this a couple weeks ago. They were being persecuted against by the Roman emperor and by other leaders around them, family members and friends. So they felt like everything was out of place, and yet they wanted to follow God, and it was challenging. And the big idea that Peter starts with, we talked about this week one, and this is kind of the theme for the whole book, is when you know where you belong, you can live confidently out of place. When you know where you belong, where you know where you were designed to be, then you don't have to be like everyone else. But the challenge is in our workplace, in our families, sometimes in our culture, when we start to look around, everybody seems to say things that are different from us. And so we start to feel like we stick out and everybody else is looking at us. We don't fit in. We're out of place. And the tension that we feel, especially when people mistreat us, especially when people treat us unfairly, and even more so, especially when that comes to our beliefs or what the Bible says, the way in which we should live, our temptation is to fall into that same thing we talk about in middle school, high school. It's to try to fit in. We fall into peer pressure, right? And it's like, you know what? I'm just going to try to look like everybody else. And if I can just be like them at work, and if I can just be like them in my neighborhood, and if I can be like those people, then maybe I won't feel so awkwardly out of place because we don't know where we belong. And what we realize is even when we try to fit in, something still isn't quite right. Because you can't just take other people's lives, choices, and values and just paint them onto your life and live the life that God designed for you. And so we realize that that doesn't work. And so sometimes we feel like because we know we can't fit in and because we're not like the rest and because that makes us, there's tension there, we feel like the solution is to flee. And we realize, I'm going to need that cup back. It's yours. Thank you so much. As you can see, it creates a problem. This isn't God's plan either. It was not God's design that you and I create a holy huddle of people that just look and talk and sound just like us. No, when we know where we belong, we don't have to fit in, we don't have to flee, and at times we may have to resist the urge to want to fight back, especially when it's not fair. When we know where we belong, we can live confidently out of place, and when it comes to treating others, we are free to honor everyone. And here's part of the challenge with that. Part of the challenge goes back to your childhood and to my childhood. And when, from a very young age, we are taught something verbally that I think once you spend a couple minutes with me, you're going to realize how hard it is to live out. If you have children at home, you teach them what? The golden rule. And what's the golden rule? Relationship training sounds like this. Treat others the way that you want to be treated. And so when people cut you off in traffic, you should actually respond to them the way that you want to be responded to when you do something a little absent-minded, right? We do that all the time, don't we? When people say something rude about you, we should respond to them the way that we would want to be responded to when we say something that's inappropriate or when we make a mistake or have a misunderstanding. We should want to treat other people with that. I mean, come on, let's be honest. That's what we teach kids, and there's nothing wrong with that. But what's relationship reality? And when you think about the way that you live with people in your neighborhood and in your family, relationship reality sounds like this. I'm going to treat you the way that you treat me. And so you know what? If you do something that I feel like is unfair, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to be tempted to fight back. And because you treated me unfairly, my desire is to get even. It's to get back at you, to make you pay for what you've done for me. And here's what happens, is when we begin to make this our relationship reality with the people that we do life with in our neighborhood and in our workplace, we become a judge. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not talking about discerning between good and evil. I think that's an important element in our everyday life. I'm talking about how we treat other people. Another word for this could be self-righteous. When we become self-righteous, then we feel like we have the right to hand out punishments, or we have the right to speak our mind. We have the right to put you in your place, and we have to deal with this temptation, this reality, often in our everyday life. Here's a simple experience, a simple example of an experience that I went through recently. In February, my wife and I decided after 15 years to upgrade our sofa and love seat. 15 years of 2 dogs, 4 kids, several different types of groups meeting at our house, and remarkably, this sofa love seat has held up quite nicely. And so for the President's Day sale, which is a good time to buy furniture, my wife had gone around and we wanted to take advantage of finding a really good deal on a sofa and love seat to replace them, to kind of match kind of culture today. And she found this set of leather love seat and sofa that was really nice. And so we placed an order and we made it in time to get the deal. And the woman on the phone, when I was talking to her, said, "We have a love seat in stock and you can get your couch later, or we can send them both together." I did not realize how important of a decision this is. Because for those of you that have spent any time with leather furniture, you know you need to get them from the same dye lot, because getting the dye on the leather to match, even though it looks great in the showroom, doesn't always show up that way. So I was so excited. I'm like, send the love seat now. We're pumped. And whenever the couch comes in, it's great. So a week goes by, and 2 weeks go by, and 3 weeks go by, and it's on delay. But eventually the couch shows up, and it looks like this. Like, something looks out of place. I mean, this is not matching. So we call them up. They were super nice. They're like, "We'll send you another couch." They sent us another couch that looked the same. We're like, "This is still a problem." We're like, "They'll send you another love seat." They sent us another love seat. It still didn't match. They sent us a love seat and a couch, and they still didn't match. I mean, we're on delivery number 4, and at this point, I'm feeling so gracious and kind that I take 2 cushions into the furniture store, and I'm standing in line, and I'm looking over at this set that matches really nicely, and the manager comes out, and basically what I get from him is, "I'm really sorry for your inconvenience, and that's about it. We can return you the money, or you can have a couch and love seat that don't match." And at this point, little Mr. Judgy starts to creep up inside of me, and I want to tell this manager how much of an inconvenience and a problem. Now, there's nothing wrong with wanting to get your money's worth, but I wanted to put him in his, I'm frustrated here, and along walks somebody who attends Cedar Creek right behind the manager. Delicious. I talked to him, he was here last night, I talked to him afterwards, he's like, "I don't know that I've ever seen you frustrated like that," because that's what happens, right, you know? Because when we treat other people the way that they kind of feel like they're treating us, then honor isn't a part of the equation. We want to judge and we want to put them in their place. And here's what happens. When we live here long enough, we start to move into a more dangerous relationship reality that sounds like this. I'm going to treat you the way I think you're going to treat me. It's not based on how you're treating me. The word for this is prejudge. I begin to prejudge how you're going to respond. And I begin to prepare and treat you as if you're already treating me that way. This is called prejudice. And you know, I've never met somebody who goes, "Oh yeah, I want to be known as a prejudiced person." Our tendency is usually to be very defensive and say, "Oh, I'm not that. I'm not that." But we don't take time to evaluate the way that we prejudge people because of the color of their skin, or because of their religious beliefs, or their sexual, we begin to prejudge and treat them the way that we think they deserve. And that is not the way that Jesus treated us. And that is not the way that the Bible invites Jesus followers to live. Regardless of whether people are treating you fairly or not. Now, I need to take a time out because the passages that we are going to look at here in just a minute, these passages have been tragically abused by people in power to tell the people not in power how they should serve them. And that is wrong, and frankly, it is embarrassing. It is embarrassing for every Jesus follower. Peter was writing this letter to a group of people who were being mistreated by their emperor and by their neighbors and by their employers and by their husbands and sometimes by their wives and within their communities of people. This is a letter written to people who are treated unfairly and should never, ever, you and I should never use this to tell people how to honor us. It's really an invitation for each of us to know that when we know where we belong, we can honor everyone always. Here's what he says. He says this. He says, it's God's will that your honorable lives should silence those ignorant people who make foolish accusations against you. Honorable there means good, pleasurable, attractive. You should live in such an attractive way that it would silence any unfair treatment. It doesn't mean that it does silence it. It doesn't even mean that it stops it. Now, what he doesn't say is it's that your words. No, it's your conduct. It's the way that you and I treat the people around us. And here's what he says in the next verse. He says, for you are free. You are free, which is a peculiar phrase, and we are, as Americans, we kind of think about our freedom, but he says, you are free, yet you are God's slaves. What does he mean there? He's reminding his audience and you and me where we belong. You see, his audience didn't feel free. They felt under the rule of this emperor that they had no choice but to submit to. They felt under the rule of their master, whoever their master was, sometimes by their class, wherever they were at economically, oftentimes by their race, and right now by their religion. They didn't feel free, and yet he's reminding them that we don't define ourselves in earthly terms. God says that we are free. He uses a passage that we are his prized possession, that we are part of his noble family, that we are owned by God. He's reminding us where we belong. In that passage again, you are free, yet you are God's slaves. You belong to God. So don't use your freedom as a means of self-righteousness, as a means to judge, to mistreat, to point out everybody else's mistakes or whatever. That doesn't mean that we keep our mouths closed in the face of evil, but it's that our honorable conduct and our freedom should never come at dishonoring someone else. That's why he says respect everyone. Not just the people who treat you fairly. Respect everyone. Love the family of believers. Fear God and respect the king. The emperor, respect him? He doesn't deserve our respect. He's killing off Christians and he's using them as entertainment, lighting them on fire for his dinner parties. He doesn't deserve my respect. No. When you know where you belong, you can honor everyone always. And we are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, God's very own possession. You see, Peter keeps referring to us and to these Christians. We are foreigners. We are travelers here. Essentially, this is not our home. We are guests. And when we forget where we belong, we try to make this place our home. And that's when we feel threatened. That's why we feel super defensive when we don't get what we deserve and we forget. We're in somebody else's territory, that our belonging is with him. And when you know where you belong, then you can show up into each of these environments that he talks about as a guest, ready to honor everyone. Honor does not mean agree. Honor does not mean turn a blind eye to injustice. Honor, as you're going to see, is about our conduct. And he starts with these distant relationships. He spends about 30 verses or so, 20 to 30 verses, rifling through all of the spaces that we need to honor. Here, the first one is people with different beliefs. Look at what he says. Be careful to live properly among your unbelieving neighbors. You know what that means? That means people who don't believe that they don't believe Jesus the way that you believe Jesus. They don't have the same values that you have. They don't have the same cultural, sexual, relational principles that you have. He says to live properly. That word properly is honorably, attractive. It's a good life among them. Then, even if they accuse you of doing wrong, even if they call you out of place, even if they say inappropriate things about you, they will see your what? Your honorable behavior, and look at the result. God will use that to give honor to God when he judges the world. It's our honorable conduct with them that when we know where we belong, in the end, even if we get mistreated now, God will make all things right. So let's live with our neighbors. Let's live with people who don't believe what we believe, people who have different values than we have, in an honorable and authentically loving way. That's essentially what he's telling these Christians to do with Romans who were uncomfortable. These Romans were uncomfortable with Christians. Romans were highly superstitious. They believed in multiple gods, and they didn't want to do anything to disrupt the gods, because you know what they did not believe? They did not believe that the gods loved humans. They believed that the gods were annoyed with humans, but the Romans just happened to live in such a way that was pleasurable for them. And so when this group of Christians came along and started talking about a God who loves them, it was like, what? That this God who loved them sent a son to die for them. They were like, what? They even accused Christians of being cannibals, because Christians would get together to eat body and drink blood, remembering the Son of God. They were so concerned about what this was going to disrupt in their culture that they ridiculed them and pushed them out of their social circle. And yet, Peter is reminding these Christians to be honorable with them, even though their beliefs are different. And it's not just with people with different beliefs. He goes on to talk about within the government. He says, for the Lord's sake, submit to all human authority. Yeah, but they're killing us. Yeah. Whether the king is head of state or the officials that he has appointed. Submit means to open your life. It's to fall into line. And it's a little different for us than it was for them, where you have Nero, who's an emperor, and they had no choice. What does it look like to live honorably as a citizen and to submit in the government that we have, whether we appreciate it or love it or even agree with it? Imagine what would be different if, instead of dishonoring publicly and privately and the way that we use our words all the time, if we let our conduct as good citizens within this democracy speak more than what we put on social media. Instead of the only thing about the way that I feel about our country being on social media, what if we just got involved as honorable citizens? Imagine. I mean, if you're wondering what does it look like to honor, we're going to talk about that a little bit more in just a minute. But we should seek to honor and submit within the government, and also with our boss, within our workplaces. I know this is starting to hit home. If you have any issues with some of the content, you can email me. I'm just going to forward them on to peter@thepearlygates.com, okay? And I'll let him reply. Look at what he says here. He says, you who are slaves must submit to your masters with all respect. And now this is one of those passages in particular that's been text-jacked. And it's embarrassing. Now, especially in light of the American history, this has been used and abused to perpetuate slavery. Wrong, embarrassing, tragic. In the Roman culture, servants or slaves were oftentimes better off than free men. Now, it's not the same as employment today. They didn't have labor laws like we have today, but the best way to look at this, Peter is telling them that wherever you're employed, serve your master. I mean, that's what he says. He says, submit to your master with all respect. In the original language, it is orient your life in such a way that you help them make a profit. In other words, be the best employee that you can be. And look what he says. Do what they tell you, not only if they are kind and reasonable, but even if they're cruel. even if they don't respect you, even if they don't always treat you fairly. Now, this is not a biblical case for staying in a physically abusive environment, okay? So don't say this, don't look at this as God's way of saying, yep, you have to stay with this abusive boss or in this abusive or toxic work environment. But for many of us, man, don't we all deal with people in our workplace who kind of treat us unfairly? Christians shouldn't be the first to complain. We should be the most sought-after employees in the country. We should be living honorably when we show up at work. Now, it's not just distant relationships, it's also close. And he starts to give a little picture of why this is important. Look at what he says. He says, God has called you to do good, even if it means suffering, even if it's challenging, even if it doesn't always make you happy, even if you're treated unfairly. Again, I'm not saying abuse, but even when work doesn't make you feel the way you want to feel. He says, God called you to do good, even if it means suffering, just as Christ suffered for you. This is where the spiritual element kicks in, where you know where you belong. Why? He is our example. We must follow in his steps. You can go and read the rest of it for yourself. He gives a series of verses that remind us of Jesus' incredible example. I picked one of those references. It says that he, Jesus, did not retaliate when he was insulted, nor threatened revenge when he suffered. He left his case in the hands of God, who always judges fairly. When I read the story of Jesus, sometimes I try to put myself in his shoes. He's the Son of God. He has access to all the power that created you and me. And there are times where he's accused of being Satan. He's accused of all sorts of things that are wrong and inappropriate. He is mistreated. And if it were me and I had all of that power, I would be really tempted to go all Indiana Jones on whoever was accusing me. Make their face melt right in front of me. They'll be like, see, that's who I am. Make a hand grow out of their chest and slap them in the face, like. He had the power. And he had the right. That's what makes it challenging. He had the authority, a perfect life, to put anybody in their place. And yet when it came to the way he treated people, he did not turn a blind eye to evil, but man, he was super honorable, especially with people who deserved it the least. And if we're Jesus followers, we should do the same thing in our culture and in our family. He talks about close relationships, like wives with your husbands. Look at what he says in chapter 3, verse 1. In the same way, you wives must accept the authority of your husbands. This is not going to get me on like the top 10 talks of the year. It's like, who wants to hear submit to your husband? Every time I bring it up with my friends, it's like eye roll. I know it's in the Bible, but the truth is, too often, we place expectations on each other that only God can fulfill. And when your husband does not live up to those expectations, sometimes some women, and you may be better at this than others, some women feel like it gives them the right to no longer respect and honor their husband. Notice Peter is not giving instructions on what you need to do to change people into your preferred image of them. No, he's saying, you wives must accept the authority of your husbands. And then even if some refuse to obey the good news, even if some don't live up, don't operate the way that you hope or wish, or believe in God the way that you do, your godly lives will speak to them without any words. It's your honorable conduct. They will be won over by observing your pure and reverent lives. Now again, this is not a biblical case to stay in a physically abusive situation. You need to talk to someone about that. But think about how our marriages would be different. Wives, but you may be thinking, but it's not fair. He doesn't deserve it. He's not doing. Your role, when you know where you belong, is to honor. It's to honor your husband. I'm telling you what, as a dude, it's like we're just grown-up 6-year-olds. You ever seen a 6-year-old at the pool? Hey, Mom, watch me. They jump in. Hey, Mom, watch me. They jump in. Hey, Mom, watch me. They jump in. And if you say, that's great, they won't stop all day long. Come home and find ways to look at your husband and offer encouragement and respect. Because if I could speak on behalf of dudes, every time we turn on the television, and not every time, but often when we turn on the television and look at examples around us, and this is not a pity party, it's just there's very few spaces where we feel or sense that there's anything honorable in us sometimes. So man, it's great. Be that voice of encouragement and find a way to come alongside and encourage that part in them. And husbands, we don't get let off the hook. Look at what he says. He says in verse 7, in the same way, husbands must give honor. We must give honor to your wives. Treat your wife with understanding. Honey, help me understand what this feels. Listening to, it's stepping into whatever emotional storm she's in the midst of. That's how you honor. You connect with them. He says, treat your wife with understanding as you live together. And she may be weaker than you, but she is your equal partner in God's gift of new life. Now, I know you may not like the word weaker, but what Peter is talking about is revolutionary in the Roman culture. He is calling women not property. He's not calling them a business arrangement. He's calling them equal partners in God's economy. So husbands, honor your wives. And then he says something that should send a little Mufasa shiver up all of us husbands' spines. Here, look at what he says. He says, treat her as you should so that your prayers will not be hindered. How you honor your wife is a reflection of how you're trusting and knowing God. And when you're dishonoring your wife, it's not so much that God isn't listening to your prayers, it's a reflection that you have forgotten where you belong. And husbands, it's the way that we honor our wives. Men, it's the way that we honor other people that teaches the next generation. Women too. I mean, think about it. The best way to help our kids honor others is how we honor them as we're instructing them and as they watch us honor others in our lives, not just teaching them the golden rule. So how you talk about your coworkers and your neighbors and the government and how you post on social media and how you use your words, all of those are the classroom that's teaching the next generation how to live this out. And so what does it mean to honor someone? I made an acronym. If you're taking notes, you can write this down. This just helps give a picture. The H stands for humility. It's to be humble. To be humble means I keep myself in check. My preferences, my opinions, my words, my happiness, my comfort. I don't use it at the expense of others. I don't pursue it at the expense of others. Being humble is about keeping myself in check. Peter says it this way later on in that passage. He says, all of you should be of one mind. He doesn't say everyone should be of your mind. He says we should understand each other, sympathize with each other, love each other as brothers and sisters, be tenderhearted and keep a humble attitude. At work, in our neighborhood, on social media, with our family, with our spouses, we should step into every relationship with humility, not self-righteousness. Just that one principle alone would change our world. I mean, if you think about it, when you're giving honor to someone, you are humbly elevating or acknowledging who they are, that they matter to God. On the golf course, you give honors to the person who won the last hole. That means they get to go first. And that's what it means to have a humble attitude. That's why when I'm on the golf course, I give honors every single hole. Nobody gives me honor. They give me pity, okay? Like, all right, so give honor. Let other people go first. Let them speak before you prejudge them. Get to know them. Help me understand your perspective before you assassinate their character because of their perspective, their upbringing, their background. Let's be humble. The O is for open-hearted. Open-hearted is ultimately about our willingness to connect person to person. It's to connect with people without any ulterior motive. I'm not connecting with you to use you. I'm not ignoring you because it's being willing to connect with people. He says it this way in the passage. He says to love one another, sympathize. When you weep, I weep. When you laugh, I want to understand that so that I can laugh with you. Sympathize with each other, love each other, be tender-hearted. That sounds soft, but it's just being open to where people are at. And understanding that sometimes when people treat you the way that they treated, it's more of a reflection of what's going on in their world than yours. So don't make it about you. Try to connect with the people in your neighborhood, wherever they're at, wherever they're coming from, whether you agree or not. Be open-hearted. The N is for non-combatant. This is about not getting defensive. This is about being able to disagree with someone and not draw blood. Oh. I mean, how relevant. It's like 2,000 years and we still haven't figured this out. He says this, don't repay evil for evil. And so when someone says something on social media or at work, don't rip them back. I don't like the media, so light the media on fire and put them on blast on your soul. I mean, come on. I don't like the president, whatever party you're a part of. I don't like this politician. We see, when we start assassinating people's character, that's not honoring. I'm not saying you have to agree, but what would it look like to be non-combatant? And if we can't be non-combatant in our dialogue, then maybe we should honor them by taking a step back and taking a deep breath and keeping our mouths shut. That would be powerful. That's what the end is about. Don't retaliate with insults when people insult you, even if they don't treat you fairly, because your honorable conduct will silence them. The other O is for being open-handed. Look for practical ways to be generous, whether you know them or not. Instead of paying back evil for evil, he says this, pay them back with a blessing. I mean, this is what Jesus taught. Love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. If somebody asks for 1, give them 2 miles of service. Let that be the attractive and honorable conduct you carry with you to work, even when you're treated unfairly. Be open-handed. I mean, this is one of the things I love about our groups. Many of your groups are participating in Serve Day this coming Saturday. Churches all over the country are taking a day or 2 or a week in July to basically be a blessing in their community, to find simple, practical ways to be generous with people. We should be doing this all the time. We should be leading the way because of the way Jesus was a blessing for us. So be a blessing. And the R at the end stands for receptive. We should be humble, open-hearted, non-combatant, open-handed, and receptive. And this may be the most important letter of them all. Because when we forget where we belong, when we forget that we belong with God, then we start placing expectations on others' acceptance of us. We start placing expectations on our government instead of remembering that ultimately we serve the King of all kings. We start placing expectations on our boss and on our workplaces to provide things that maybe only God can ultimately provide. We start placing expectations on our spouse to live up to things that will ultimately crush them. We start asking for things from people that we can ultimately only get from God. And so we need a receptive posture, because when we do, when we remember where we belong, this is what God has called you to do, and He will grant you His blessing. See, when it comes to the spiritual journey, honoring God isn't just what good Christians do. The spiritual journey is the 4 steps that kind of summarize what walking with God or being in a relationship with God is all about. It's about knowing Him. It's about finding freedom from areas that you're stuck. It's about discovering your purpose and ultimately making a difference. And when you and I choose, with God's help, to honor people even when we are mistreated, what we discover is a unique way to know God personally, and as we know God, He uses that honorable conduct to make a difference, whether we see it or not. You see, when we live honorably, even when we are treated unfairly, we can connect with what Jesus faced at a deeper, personal, more spiritual level, and this is what drove the Christians of the first church. There was one man who was alive at the time of Peter's writing of this letter, Saint Ignatius. Some of you have heard of him. There are churches named after him. He is one of the fathers of the faith, and his voice represents one of thousands of Christians whose honorable conduct caught people's attention. Look at what he says. He says, right now I'm a prisoner, learning what it means to put aside my desires. From Syria to Rome, the region where Peter is writing, I'm already battling with wild beasts. By land and sea, night and day, I'm chained to 10 leopards, the soldiers who have me in custody. And when they are treated kindly, they only become more cruel to me. However, through their mistreatment, I am becoming a better disciple. Not that this earns me any credit with God. He says, I'm only now beginning to understand what it means to be a disciple. And I pray that the events in that arena and the unseen forces of wickedness behind them will not conspire against me out of envy and prevent me from reaching Jesus Christ. So bring on the fire, bring on the cross, bring on the hordes of wild animals. Let them wrench my bones out of socket and mangle my limbs and grind up my whole body. Bring on the hideous tortures from the devil. Just let me get to Jesus Christ. Nothing on this wide earth matters to me anymore. When you know where you belong, you can live confidently out of place. And no matter how you're treated, you can step into that environment free to honor everyone. And so the question is, who do you need to honor this week? Who do you need to start treating differently? Who do you owe an apology to? Imagine with me what could happen if Christians were known for their honorable conduct instead of their judgmentalism and hypocrisy and opinions and preaching on street corners. Imagine what would happen in our families, in our communities, in our workplaces if we lived this out to the same degree that the founding fathers of our faith did. I think it would change the world. But it means you have to remember where you belong. And then when you show up at work on Monday and in your neighborhood and family and difficult relationships, we're going to be humble and open-hearted and non-combatant and open-handed. And ultimately, we're going to be receptive, remembering that this is the way that Jesus taught and treated us. And so will you make that your prayer with me today, that we would honor everyone as we remember that we belong with him. God, thank you so much for every single one of us in the place that you've put us at this community, at this point in human history. And God, thanks for the incredible example that we have in Jesus, who even though we didn't deserve it, even though we did not treat him fairly, he was gracious with us. And so God, give us the courage and the grace to be humble and to be open-hearted, to be non-combatant when we want to be defensive, to be open-handed, and ultimately to remember as we receive from you, when we remember where we belong, we can show up in every environment to honor people that matter to you. May we be known for our honorable conduct in the days and weeks and years ahead. And God, would you use that to change our world? Thank you for this invitation to partner with you to make a difference, and for giving us the strength and the example to do that. In Jesus' name, amen. Thanks so much.